Welcome to Software Rocks, the art and craft of writing code and why teams make the money. Today on the show, the art and craft of writing code and why teams make the money. And something you can do today to start making your development better. This week, I want to talk about the other side of developing great software. So we've talked about leadership, vision, clear communication, honesty, agility, and I've touched a little bit on innovation. Innovation, again, as I've said previously, innovation, I think, it comes after so many other things. It's such an advanced thing compared to actually just sorting yourself out. I want to stay focused on actually sorting out your development before I come anywhere near innovation. So I'm coming on to that. But we've talked about those bits and pieces, all incredibly important to actually getting development off the ground, doing actual work and focusing and getting everything else. But I want to talk about the other side of that coin, and that's the actual writing code and actually doing development. It's all good to have management people in place, doing the leadership, having the vision, expressing what you want, all those bits and pieces. And again, there's tons in there that I need to talk about, and I haven't got anywhere near talking about them just yet. Gathering requirements and expressing requirements alone is massive. And again, it's an important part of leadership and vision. So it ties into so much stuff. Anyway, going off topic, there we go. I've stayed away from the technical end of things because I don't want to, with this show, I don't want to go into the technical guts of actually writing code. There's already a ton of amazing podcasts and shows out there for the most amazing people talking about the ins and outs of actually writing code. And that's what I want to stay away from. I'm going to leave that to them because they're infinitely better at that than I am. That's not what this show's about. This show is all about talking to development, organising your management, having vision, having leadership, doing all those bits and pieces. But you can't have software development without an actual understanding of the software developers and what it actually takes to do development of software. So that's what I'm going to touch on today. Not massively technical, but at least give you some overview. I want to show you why developing software is unlike anything else most businesses take on. So just to give you a little background on myself, I've been a software developer for just on 15 years. And when I say software developer, I mean writing code day in, day out, every single day for years and years on end. So I've seen the other end of this thing, and I'm now moving on. I've moved some time ago. I moved beyond just writing code, and I understand the importance of the other side of it. But I've been there. I am a software developer at heart. I write software, and I do code. And so I've seen the other side of this, and I understand why an understanding of actual software development is so important, and something I think so many businesses actually lack. They've got a lot of people high up in many companies controlling and running software development without even the most basic understanding of what it actually takes to do software development. I worked at one place where the person who managed the website didn't have a basic understanding or grasp of how a website was put together, what HTML was, what code was, what all these bits and pieces were. And I was quite really surprised when I worked that out. I was shocked that you could be the manager or something and not have even the most basic idea of how it actually works. I think maybe that comes from my own personal belief that if you're going to manage people and ask them to do things, you need to know how to do that thing before you can ask others to do it. But we've touched on some of that, and I'm sure it will come up again. Many pet peeves of my own. So what I talked about today is things like the craft of writing code, the art of creating software, why finding great people is hard, why keeping them is even harder, why forming them into teams is key, and keeping them together is what actually makes you the money. That's what eventually pays the bills and actually brings the cash in. And again, it comes from my own personal experience of seeing so many key companies not understand these basic principles of what it's like to actually write code, and thinking, we've got groups of accountants. We can treat software developers exactly like accountants. They're exactly the same. When in actual fact, software developers are much closer tied to people like website designers and graphic artists than they are accountants and business people like that. Only it seems that I think graphic artists and designers have the advantage that they can show off these amazing pictures and people will look at it and go, wow, that's amazing. The best a software developer's got to show off is hopefully a working bit of software or lines and lines and lines of code. But unfortunately, most people don't have an appreciation of why so much work becomes completely invisible and should become completely invisible if you do it correctly. We're victims of our own success in some ways. I'm not expecting the audience of this. I'm not expecting you to be a software developer. If you are, fantastic. You've got a good understanding of this stuff already. Brilliant. But if you're not, if you're in charge of development teams, if you're running a company and you've got software development going on inside it, I'm hoping I can give you a little bit of an insight into what actually writing software is really all about. The craft of writing code. I was going to start talking about this by saying how software is a craft. But I've actually just finished Ed Catmull's book on Creativity Inc. about what he did at Pixar and Disney. A fantastic book, and I'm probably going to do an episode on that, or at least cover it in a mini book review. I think I might actually put together an episode. Maybe this is next week's episode, actually. A review of the books that I've read this year and what I think is essential reading for this year, because there have been some absolutely astounding books out there this year. But I think Ed Catmull, who is the president of Pixar Animation Studios and Disney Animation Studios, someone I've known about for a long time, thanks to my pure geekery of computer science and computer-generated imagery and 3D graphics. An amazing individual. I'm not going to bore you with the details. Anyway, president of Pixar Animation Studios and president of Disney Animation Studios. So, someone who knows his stuff. He summed it up much better than I could. Craft is what we're expected to know. Art is the unexpected use of our craft. And I think, for me, that sums up so well how I see software development, and potentially where a lot of other people fall down. They only see half of that. You have a crowd of developers who say software development is an art. It's an art form. You can't understand it. Then you have another group of people who say software development is a craft, and you can become a master of that craft, and you can use it like tools. And I think Ed Catmull has summed it up perfectly. That's exactly how I see it. Software development, for me, lives somewhere in the middle. Obviously, he's talking about creativity in terms of making films and animation, but he's also a computer scientist, so he sits somewhere in the middle of that. So he summed it up perfectly. There is an absolute craft to writing software, but there's also an art to writing software, and that's what I'm going to go over here. So yeah, if you consider software as a craft, it takes years of practice to master it. And when I say years, it does take 10 good years of writing software in and out to actually be able to master software, to really know what you're talking about. And even then, you might only master a small subsection of it. I've been quite lucky that I did .NET at the start of my career. So my experience spans a whole host of various parts of what computers are. But you could become a master just in the web server end of things, or you could become a master in the services end of things, or databases. But it does take years to hone that craft. And the craft reaches out beyond just developing software. It reaches out into an understanding of what software means and how you interact with it, and when someone says something, what they might potentially really mean, and how to tease answers out of people, and how to see things, and how small changes can have massive implications, and when you should change code and when you shouldn't change code. Things that a very experienced person can come to a junior person and say, no, don't do that, and they'll say, why shouldn't I do that? Then they can lay out all these reasons, and the junior person goes, you're right, I didn't see any of that. But the master craftsman sees it naturally because they've been doing it so long. It's purely their experience. And again, I think this is where it stands me in good stead, because I can have estimation meetings and I can see the answers to bits and pieces, usually long before most others can, but that's purely my experience of doing such a broad range of software development that show that. And most of the time I've done these things before, so I can say, no, you can't do that because of this, you can't do that because of this. Here's the problems you'll have with that, and here's another approach you've come up with. You need those craftsmen. You need those. I'm going to come to this a bit later. You need the craftsmen. You need the masters, because you want that experience. And I think with that mastery comes a level of professionalism. It's potentially something we as software developers need to work on. A lot of us are not very good at being professional. I, fingers crossed, tapping my desk, hope that I always come across as professional. That's what I always aim for. But the master craftsmen, the people who've done software for a long time, understand the business requirements. They understand how important it is to present a professional image to the outside part of the company, because most of the time the company doesn't care about the innards of software. They just want a nice application that does the job with the minimum amount of fuss. And I think that's where a really experienced person can come in and take away all the details and just say, yep, we can work on that. But there's also an art. The art of creating software sits alongside this. The proof that software is also an art form comes in the fact that software development projects are not easy. They're not simple. They are highly complex, but it's not the complexity that makes them art. It's the fact that each project is unique. Every time you come to a project, it is going to be different. Because if it was purely a craft, if it was simply a case of, yep, we can do this, every project would be the same, or at least every project of a type would be the same. You'd always face the same problems and you could always solve them the same way. But because every problem is unique, there always comes a point somewhere in there which is where the craft stops and the art begins. That's where the software developer stops purely being a machine, stops practicing their craft, and starts practicing the art form that is software development, and solves those really complex problems, solves the problems that potentially people haven't seen before, and uses their skill in a way that no one else has ever seen. And I think this is the reason why software developers are so hesitant to give firm estimations on work. When a business person comes to you, the first question they always ask is, how long is that going to take? And the developer's answer is always going to be, well, we don't know, it depends, we'll make a guess. And the reason they have to make guesses and estimates, the reason they have to weigh it up and think about it, is because they know that hiding somewhere inside every single problem, there is going to be a 3%, 5% piece of that problem which is purely creative, which no one's seen before or has to be solved in a different way to everything else. And that's the part that always takes time, because you've got to find it, then you've got to solve it, then you've got to test it. And so companies need to approach software development as a much more creative field. You need to look at it much more, you need to approach it much more you would a designer and say, well, this is what we're thinking, here's the leadership, here's the vision. Now I need you to go away and give me the creative piece back, because that's what we're paying you for, that's what you're here to do. We need you to solve the creative problem. So does your company approach software development as a creative problem, or does it approach it as a function of the business? So a bit of work comes in, another bit of work comes out. You feed the beast at the front end, and out at the back of the beast comes the solutions. You don't do that with artists. Please don't think I'm trying to compare developers to artists, at least not in that fashion. But you don't do that to creative people, so you need to think about software development people in that vein as well. It's not as straightforward as it just comes in and it goes out. And this is why finding great people is really hard. I hope you can see that developers are a special breed. They have the commitment in them to learn a complex craft over a long time, and they commit to that. And it helps that a lot of them really enjoy it. I know I really enjoy computer science and the art of code and other bits and pieces. But they commit to that over a 10-year period, and their learning never finishes. A good software developer is always learning new things. Maybe not software development related always, but they're always learning. And they have accepted that they can never know their field, and there will forever be more things to understand. So they've committed to learning this craft, and they've also accepted that at some point, that craft alone isn't enough. That merely gives them the tools. They have to step out of being who they are and solve problems creatively. And this is what I think separates what I call programmers from developers. Programmers might have the craft. They might know the difference between a hammer and a screwdriver, and they may be able to put things together. But you need the developers, you need the creative thinkers to solve the complex problems. Step outside of the problem and see it for what it is. See the bigger problem. Talk to the business. Understand the vision. And translate that back to something that the programmers can understand and start working on. But the creative people are there to solve the issues, and I hope the creative people are there to raise the standard. I've worked with a lot of software developers or programmers in my time where they're happy with the status quo. They want to keep it as it is, and they put processes and problems in place because they want to make it difficult for the outside business, whereas the developers, the creative people, want to solve these problems and make it better and improve the quality, improve the standard, make development faster and better and stronger for the good of the company. They're looking after the company with that. But, of course, these people are a much rarer breed than the average programmer you're going to get off the street. They're harder to find, they're more expensive to get. But when you've got one, you will know. You can tell the difference immediately. They are the person that everyone turns to when there's an issue. They are the one that solves the problems. And they are easily worth, for every developer, they're easily worth 10 mediocre programmers. Easily. They solve the hard problems and they pull the rest of the team with them. So, of course, keeping these people is even harder. Not necessarily for the reason you think. They can be stubborn, they can be difficult to work with, although the best developers I've ever met, the ones who think about the bigger problems and want to make things better, they are very level-headed and very sensible individuals. They don't appreciate being undervalued. They want the right reward for the work that they put in. That may be monetary, but it's not always monetary. It's much more important usually for them to have the freedom and the flexibility and to have the recognition of the work they put in than simply being paid more. I know I've in the past been offered some very highly paid jobs and simply turned them down because I was enjoying what I was doing and I was solving creative problems and being recognised for them. I was given the freedom to do my job. But of course, let's be completely honest and open. Other people want those people as well, and so you have to reward them correctly. You have to give them not only the freedom, but you have to reward them monetarily. But it comes down to a simple case of if they're solving your problems, then they're going to be worth that sort of money. So that's the code and people aspect covered briefly. So why forming them into a team is key. And again, I'm turning back to Ed Catmull here. Getting the right people and the right chemistry is more important than getting the right idea. And again, I firmly believe in that. I was once in an interview with a company, interviewed a number of people that day, and I was looking at them, and some of them were technically very good. I was looking and go, yes, okay, technically you've answered my questions, and I rejected every single one of them. And when they said why, you didn't ask that many questions, because I was sitting with someone else and he was asking all these crazy technical questions. And I said, it's not about how technically good they are right now, it's about their attitude and their fit. It's about how I feel about them as a person, and I can usually judge people pretty well, which is quite handy for this. But it's about how you feel around them and how their attitude and charisma and expression, what that brings to the table. I'm not interested so much in what they can do right now, because I can always teach them how to do things. If they've got the right attitude, I can teach them how to do the problems I need to have them working on. But what I can't teach them is attitude. What I can't change is who they are. And so the person I was working with, he didn't quite understand what I was trying to get to with that. But that's a different story. I won't go into that one. So once you've got the right people, so once you've found all the right people, form them into a team and let them bond. Keep them in that team. It's only once they become comfortable with each other that the magic starts to happen. That's when they really start to turn out amazing work. And it's no different from any team that anyone's ever been on. The people have to come together, like each other, be with each other over the long term, form those bonds. That's when you start to get results. Keeping them together is what makes you the money. I've seen it much too often, and I'm actually seeing it at the moment, where just as a team's starting to get settled, just as a team's been at a company long enough to know each other, understand where they sit, do all the bits and pieces, that's when the business decides, we're having a change, we're going to start breaking you up. And the process has to start over again. And you look at it and you go, what are you thinking? Why would you do this? Again, I come back to my leadership and vision and understanding why software development is different and why are you doing this to your development environments and developers. And then many managers in this situation will tell me about Tuckman and his ideas around forming, storming, norming, and performing model for teams. And it is relatively straightforward. It's as you would think. The team forms, and they don't want to talk to each other. They don't know each other. As they get more comfortable, they start storming, which means they start more openly discussing the problems of the team and forming opinions and seeing if that, and basically testing that team to see if it will work. Then you get the norming stage where they each start to settle into their roles and they understand each other and they know where they're going. Then you get the performing stage where this team is so comfortable with each other they can turn out this amazing work. And you go, yep, relatively straightforward. I think everyone can get their head around that. And then the manager will go, yeah, but I broke that team up and now they're working with different people. Why? Why did you do that? You just told me you know all about why it's important to keep them together. Then you broke them up and you're wondering why they don't perform. And you start to wonder why doesn't any of these teams perform? It's because they know as soon as they start to get to a place where they can trust people and they can start doing work, you're going to break them up. So why are they going to put the effort in? Anyway, understand the purposes. These are creative people doing creative work. When you keep them together, when they're comfortable with each other, that's when they start to perform. That's when the innovation starts to come out. Personally, I'm a big believer in the concept of tiger teams. Tiger teams are very small, highly focused teams who work together, who have worked together for a long time, and they know each other really well. So you might have a tiger team which is 2 developers, an analyst or a tester, or you might have 3 developers and a tester. They're very small, tightly knit, they get on really well with each other, and they are incredibly effective and passionate because they know and trust each other so well. Personally, for me, I think that's the ideal you need to be aiming for. Very highly effective and potentially very specialised teams. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with lots of specialised teams where a piece of work gets handed between them. As long as you can communicate effectively, as long as you can share the vision, you can make that work. And you'll find your performance goes through the roof. But again, that requires organisation and vision, things you have to work on. I hope that's given you a bit of insight into why development is much more like a creative field than it is purely a craft-based, process-driven field. Obviously, it's incredibly complex, and I've only briefly touched on the surface of it there. But as you can see, you need to approach it slightly differently to some of the other bits and pieces you do. See it much more like a group of designers and see why they need to express themselves and act differently to everyone else. Developers are very similar, and you need to treat them differently. Something you can start doing today to make your development better. Today, I want to talk about potentially deployable increments. So you're probably sitting there thinking, Andrew, what are you talking about? What the hell is potentially deployable increments? So if you're into Agile, which I hope you are, and you're doing Scrum, the whole point of Scrum, the key piece of Scrum is the sprint, the 2-week increments of work. You do this increment, and out the end comes this piece of work. For you, is that piece of work potentially shippable? And what I mean by that is, can you take that piece of work exactly as it is, right now without doing any more work to it, and put it on your website? That's what potentially deployable increments means. What comes out the other end of your sprint is actually fully tested. Everything you need to happen has happened to it in order to be able to make it go live. No more, let's just do a week of testing. No more, well, now I've got to prep it for this. No, all of that's been done inside the sprint. You can just press a button and out it goes onto the live website. That's how companies like Google and Facebook and others are able to rapidly deploy and change their applications even multiple times per day, because inside the piece of work that the teams do, it's gone through all of the steps that are necessary to make it live. This is where the real power comes from, and this is where I see a lot of companies really struggling. They don't understand. They are still potentially stuck in the waterfall way of doing things, where you get the developers to do a bit of work, it comes out the other side, then the testers get hold of it, they'll do a bit of work, then the UAT team get to have a look at it and they'll do it, then the SIT team, and it's fantastic. Okay, you've created a ton of work for all these people, brilliant, you've got a whole conveyor belt of stuff coming through, but once the developers have finished with it, it's going to be 2 months before it can get onto the live website, at which point the business owners change their mind, the stakeholders change their mind, conditions have changed, so much has happened between the software being developed and the actual code going live on the site anything could be different, and you'll end up with tons and tons of work. I've seen this many times. Tons of work that comes out of the development team that just never goes live because ideas and thinking has changed in the meantime. That's incredibly demoralizing to not just the developers and the testers who are involved in doing that, but to the business people as well. They know that they have to get their ideas spot on. They've got to be exactly correct the very first time they do it, because it will take them 2 months to get it to live, at which point, if they decide to change their mind, they've got to stop that piece of work going out, come all the way back to the beginning, ask for the next change. That's going to take at least 2 weeks, if not longer, and then it's another 2-month wait before it can go live again. You've created a situation where you can't make mistakes. You must never get things wrong because it takes so long and is so expensive to fix. It's just not feasible. You want changes in thinking and new ideas to be instantaneous, or as close to instantaneous as you can possibly have. And that means the developers do the work a short time after it's deployable, at which point you can put it out and start to test it and realize your thinking was wrong and go back, and 2 weeks later you've got another one. You can do it even faster than that, but this is the radical shift in thinking that Agile brings, and something that a lot of companies struggle with. They want the innovation, they want the speed. They don't realize the cost of that is a complete rethink of how they work. It is totally possible. I've done it myself multiple times. You can do it. Even the most entrenched waterfall style company can do it, as long as they've got a passion and that the teams have an understanding of why it's important, why these principles are so key to being flexible and agile, and the buy-in from the company, of course. You can do it. It's not impossible. Thanks for listening to Software Rocks. For more information and show notes on this episode, go to softwarerocks.tv/7. I'm also going to put a special download together for this episode. Go over my key points here and turn it into a PDF that you can download and have a look at. Really handy for just thinking about software development differently. Don't forget, if you like the show, please give me a review on iTunes or whatever platform it is you're listening to me on. Leave me a comment. I love to read through them, and it really helps me get the word out to more people like you. Hopefully make development a little bit better for everyone. If you want to get in touch to ask me a question, or you just got something to say, email me, andrew@softwarerocks.tv, or you can get on the Facebook group, or you can sign up for the newsletter. Again, I'm putting bits and pieces together, and I'm using the newsletter to get that out to everyone. Finally, you can follow me on Twitter @AndrewBinstead. Thanks for listening, and I hope your development just got a little bit better. Make the money. Oh yeah. So there you go. First show of the day. Today on the show, I want to talk about the art and craft of writing code and why you want teams and no, don't say that. Clear communication. So there's another software developers. Don't forget, if you like the show, please give me a review. I was doing so well.